I'm Eric Girard, and I'm the CEO of Girard Training Solutions, a management development firm that focuses on helping new managers transform from high-performing individual contributors to great people managers. I also have an Amazon #1 best-selling book called Lead Like a Pro, The Essential Guide for New Managers. Today, I am delighted to have Will Goldstein-Mahon with me. Will, welcome to the show. Who are you and what do you do?
Hey, thank you so much for having me, Eric. And who am I? Oh my goodness, how long of a podcast?
You got 25 minutes. So
I am. All right. Well, I'm the Director of Learning and Organization Development at Jordan's Furniture. It's a regional furniture chain based in New England. Been in the L&D space for almost 20 years, focused largely on leadership development, specifically with a focus on new hires. So I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm excited for this conversation, hoping to add a lot of value.
Yeah, this has been
listeners.
a long time coming, so I'm really excited. So thank you for being here, and I am looking forward to our conversation. Our topic today is one size does not fit all, our unique motivators. And this is based on an assessment that Will talk to us about. So let's get started here, Will, with my first question. Let's talk through some of the key differences between engagement and motivation. Let's start with that.
Yeah, sure. And, really excited. Thanks for allowing me to talk about this topic. I think for your audience, folks who are largely newer to management, there's a lot of emphasis that is placed on employee engagement. Lots of organizations, especially larger organizations, will have things like employee engagement surveys, they'll have engagement teams. So there's a lot of emphasis that's placed on how engages our workforce, right? And this is when folks come to work, do they feel a sense of purpose? Do they feel a sense of belonging? Is there a sense of commitment to the organization? And really, like, what's the relationship between an organization and their employees? And valid, necessary. I'm glad that there's so much emphasis and growing emphasis on engagement. And there's not nearly as much emphasis on employee motivation and how do we measure that? How do we tackle those conversations? Are my employees motivated when they come to work each day? And do I clearly understand what drives, excites, and motivates each of them? And conversely, what demotivates them? So, I like to think of engagement as kind of the relationship with my organization. But really, when I think of intrinsic motivation, this is like, what is the internal drive that I feel that keeps me satisfied when I come to work each day? And for your audience, for those of you listening, I think this is something that flies under the radar, and it overlaps a bit with engagement, but it's so different, and it is necessary if you're going to be effective in your role as a new leader. Understanding what motivates or demotivates somebody on your team, and then really confidently leaning into those conversations is tantamount to success.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for setting the stage with that. So that's really, really helpful to sort of help us understand where we're headed with this conversation. Let's talk now about how a new manager can approach the topic of motivation, or as you said, demotivation with an employee.
Yeah. So, I think this is something that should be one of the first conversations you have with an employee. I mean, it's as simple as, what do you love most about coming to work each day? Really specifically, what is it? This should even be part of the interview process. What does an optimally motivating environment look like for you? And people will tell you in their own way what really drives and excites and motivates them. From the interviewing and hiring process, this is a really great way. When people talk about what motivates and drives and excites them, you'll tend to see a little fire in their eye, a little twinkle. And that's when you can really tell what gets people excited to do their best. It'll also allow you the ability to see, like, gosh, like, does this role, does this culture, does this environment, the opportunity that I'm potentially providing to somebody if they come on board, does that align with what motivates them? And it can be I realize it can be uncomfortable perhaps for folks, especially newer leaders, to broach the topic of what demotivates you. But, I would ask you, Eric, and your listeners, like, what's that thing, when you come to work every day, we all have that one thing that you say, I wish I could delegate this. Like, what's that one thing that I wish I didn't have to do when I came to work? It's just, maybe I've got to do it, but it's not something that sparks joy. It's not the reason I come to work each day. For me, that is Excel sheets. If I could pass that to somebody else on the team, it's a good day, right? But we've all got that thing that we enjoy less than other parts of our job, and having those conversations might feel uncomfortable, perhaps, but it's also really important to understand what are the things that perhaps demotivate different members of your team, and then where it makes sense, how can you, as an effective leader, create an environment where people can get the things that are more motivating? Because when people are engaged and motivated, you will see them be more productive with less effort and more joy. And what a combination that is, right? If you can have folks on your team who are more productive with less effort and more joy, I'll tell you what, that's going to be a really dynamic and productive and happy team.
I've been on teams like that, and you're right. It's awesome. It's just amazing. So +1 to that for sure.
Yeah. All right, I've got to ask you though, what's your thing? What's that one thing that you would like to take off?
It's two things actually. You mentioned Excel sheets. I am not a real fan of Excel. I'm not real good with fiddly details. And also sales is a big part of my job. And I'm coming around. I'm learning to find a way to make it mine in a way that is tolerable to me. But when I think sales, I think, hey, what's it going to take to get you into this Buick today? The schmoozy, slimy used car salesman, and I do not want to be that. I'm scared to death of being that. And so really thinking about, okay, in order for this company to survive, I have to sell. I have to have people buying my services. So how do I do that in a way that's genuine and authentic and not schmoozy and not gross? It's taking a lot more effort and work than, for example, just facilitating a workshop would take. Like, facilitating a workshop is hard work, but to me, that's fun. Sales is work.
Yeah. It's your demotivator. And so if that was largely the main focus of your role, you'd probably be an unhappy employee over, a fair amount of time. You wouldn't enjoy coming to work each day if that were, the main focus of your scope.
Yeah. And I've been in jobs where it was clearly not a fit, and I stuck around out of stubbornness. I was not going to bail. I was going to stick that through, and it just ground me down and didn't go well. So can totally relate.
Yeah.
Well, aren't some things just part of your job? I mean, regardless of whether or not there's somebody's demotivator, you got to do sales. You got to work in Excel sheets. You got to do a VLOOKUP. I mean, isn't that just part of your job?
So there are certainly some things that are part of your job, and I'll pass it back to you here. You might say, hey, you know what? At times, I might have to sell myself. I might have to sell this podcast. I might have to get out there and kind of put in the hard yards so that people are aware of this really great opportunity in this podcast. And so pick your spots wisely, right? There are times in my role, I'm going to have to open that Excel file. I'm going to have to do it, right? We all have to stretch ourselves in different ways. But as effective leaders, if I recognize, and if I'm in thoughtful and regular conversation with my team, and if I understand, hey, these are the things that really spark joy in Eric, and here are the things that kind of weigh him down a little bit. My role is to determine, how can I create an environment that brings more of the positives? And then are there creative ways where creative solutions that I can come up with that might help you avoid some of those demotivating environments? So they'll come now and again, but hopefully not for a sustained period of time where, to echo the point you made a few minutes ago, you have employees who are just sticking to it because they're stubborn and they don't want to let go. No, I mean, that's if you find that you've got employees who are kind of in that boat, in that mindset, in that heart set, then as a leader, it's perhaps time to reconsider your approach to motivation.
Yeah, and sometimes the kindest thing you can do for somebody is make it possible for them to find another job. Now, the way you do that is, certainly difficult and fraught. But, if you can release somebody from a job they hate and maybe help them out finding the job that they love, then you've done your company and yourself, as well as that employee, a service.
Oh, certainly. Yeah. And nobody wants to work or lead somebody who is coming to work because they have to, because they're coming to work out of being stubborn. So, we want to make sure, any effective leader wants to make sure that we're creating an environment that fosters, high motivation in all we do.
Yep. Okay. Well, I can buy that.
All right.
Let's move on a little bit here. And I'm going to allude to an assessment you had me take. So I'm going to drop in a word here that came from that assessment. So can't you tell a little bit about what motivates someone by the role they're in? For instance, would it be fair to say that most CEOs are high in power?
So, good question. And to speak about the assessment. So, if you've gotten to this point in the podcast, you might be saying to yourself, well, all right, well, how do I know? I'm not really sure if I know what motivates me or demotivates me, or if I've got employees, perhaps there are different things that motivate or demotivate each of my direct reports. The same way that we've got surveys to measure engagement, there are different tools out there that can measure and provide language and scaffolding to motivation. And so, Eric, to your point, I shared with you an assessment. There's many of them out there. If you're listening, you can probably find them online for free. That takes a look at what are the 7 different dimensions of motivation. And this is a tool that's been around for, 100 years. It's from the early 20th century, and it's been revised and updated many times. So what I'll do, just for your listeners, I'll share at a really high level each of the 7 dimensions. And I promise you, as I go through these, there will be at least 1 or 2 where you'll say, yeah, that sounds good. And there's probably going to be 1 or 2 where you will say to yourself, that doesn't sound motivating at all. And so I encourage folks who are listening to just follow along and to think to yourself, just catch your initial reaction as I share the motivators with you, and just kind of see if you feel anything as I go through them, right? So the first motivator is called power. And this is, I am motivated, I'm driven, I'm excited by things like influence, control, competition, status. It's important for me that I have the ability to control the environments with which I'm in. And, the more influence that I have in my environments, quite frankly, the happier I'm going to be. Like, it's motivating for me to be able to kind of stand in my power and have accountability, control, impact, things like that in all that I do. The second motivator, and this is actually the most common motivator in the entire world, all right? Different countries, different industries, job levels. It's called economic. And at face value, you might think economic means money, but it means more than that. This focuses more on return on investment. So this says, if I'm motivated by the economic motivator, it says, it's motivating for me to invest my time, my energy, my efforts, my talents into something where I get a return on investment. So you'll see a lot of people who are in like commission-based environments tend to be high naturally in this economic motivator, because the more cold calls I make, the more customers I approach, the more meetings I book, the more commission I'll make. Yeah, things like that. So this just focuses on like practicality, concrete results, maximizing your return on investment, things of that nature. And, certainly money is part of that. If I invest 40 hours a week in a company, what do I get in return? Hopefully a paycheck, and a good one at that. So that would be high economic.
That was my highest.
I was going to say you're high economic. Yeah, we'll talk about that. The other one that you're high in is called theoretical. And this is the motivator that says I'm really motivated and driven when I'm in an environment of continuous learning and discovery and objectivity and facts and data, things like that. For me, the guy who doesn't like Excel sheets, not my highest motivator. But for you, you're also very high in this motivator, Eric.
Yeah, I'm
If I
very high
remember
in it.
correctly.
And I did write a book. So there's that. There was a lot of research that went into that book.
And you have a podcast that focuses on how people can use knowledge and insights and discovery to drive more practical results in their careers as leaders. So you've got those two right there, economic and theoretical. It lines up really nicely with what we're doing at the moment. The next motivator is called individualistic. And this is the motivator that focuses on it's important for me and it really drives and excites me to have freedom and autonomy and to kind of be my own person, blaze my own trail, lots of independence, uniqueness, things like that. So lots of folks, especially leaders who work in smaller companies, startups, for instance, where there's not so much red tape, right? If you find yourself driven towards smaller companies or startups or things like that, it might be because you're really high in that individualistic motivator where you can kind of experiment a bit more and color outside of the lines. Folks who tend to gravitate more towards larger organizations, folks who are at Fortune 500 companies, things like that, tend to be more motivated by the next motivator, which is called regulatory. And this is the motivator that says, it's really exciting to me, rules and processes and guidelines and procedures and regulations and structure and order. And you're shaking your head no, it looks like, as I'm even just talking about this. So this is not your space here, I take it.
It's my lowest dimension.
It's your lowest. All right. So, I worked for an organization that once upon a time that was almost 200 years old. And as you can imagine, with that comes a lot of tradition and processes. And, this is the way we do things. And for me, somebody who's really high in that individualistic motivator, I didn't get a lot of the freedom and the autonomy that I wanted. And while it was a great company, it wasn't an optimally motivating environment for me in the sense that I couldn't be as expressive as I wanted to. As an L&D professional, I like to create things from scratch, and I wasn't able to get that there. All right, the last two in the home stretch here. The last two. The first one of the two is called altruistic. And this is the motivator that says it drives, excites, and motivates me to be able to help folks. If I can invest my time, energy, efforts, and talents to help the people around me, then that is what success looks like. And so you'll see a lot of people who are in fields like healthcare, lots of folks who are in human resources, nurses, things like that, tend more than the norm to be really high, and teachers tend to be really high in altruism. And so this is kind of the motivator of like selflessness, support, improving society, helping others, things like that. And then finally, last but not least, the final motivator is called aesthetic. And this is the motivator that says what's most exciting and motivating and driving for me is the ability to have like harmony, balance, create. A lot of folks who are in things like a lot of artists, graphic designers, folks who place a lot of emphasis on things like work-life balance, yoga, things like that, tend to be higher in the aesthetic motivator than others. People who like to create things. I'm also really high in this motivator personally, Eric. And for me, one of the things I love more than anything in the learning and development space is to create a program from scratch. Whereas like, this has never existed before, and I created this. In my free time, I love painting. And so for me, even if my painting is awful, I can say, but I made this, with my own two hands. And for me, that's really motivating and kind of fun and cool. So as folks are listening, I hope that as I went through those with, at kind of a 50,000 foot view, there were probably a couple that you thought, yeah, that sounds really good to me. I get that. And there were probably a couple that you thought, nope, that doesn't resonate with me at all. Put that in the file of, Excel sheets for Will. That is a demotivator. So to answer your question, to kind of pull it back, there is a gravitational pull towards different motivators. So if you're an artist, it's likely, I've seen it not happen, but it's more likely than not that you're higher in the aesthetic motivator. If you were a data scientist, it's probably likely that you're higher than the norm in that theoretical motivator. Or if you work in law, maybe you're higher in regulatory. If you're a nurse, maybe higher in altruism. So there is a bit of a gravitational pull. I do tend to see folks who are more senior in their roles, specifically like CEOs or executive leadership team members, have a really, really diverse set of motivators. So that's kind of, I see folks in different functions that kind of line up with their motivators, but not so much job levels. It's really interesting where I've used this assessment and had conversations with CEOs and executive team members from many different companies. And there's not, at least in my experience, a connection between hierarchy in terms of like job level and what motivates you. You might be the CEO and own your company because you want to help people or you want to express yourself. So it might not connect to power per se.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Now, full disclosure, I use DISC in my practice, and I'm very closely tied to DISC. So this did take a little bit of a mind shift for me to sort of pivot over to motivators. But I've enjoyed the way you described this, and I think that it's very interesting. So we will get a chance to find out how to get a hold of you in a second, so that if folks want to learn more about this tool, they can. But now is the part of the show where you get to ask a question of me. So if you want to kind of riff on what we've been talking about or go someplace else, this is your chance to kind of quiz me a little bit.
Certainly. Well, I've been dying to ask you, as you mentioned a moment ago, I did send you this assessment and I had seen your results, and I haven't asked you. You just shared a moment ago that you're very high in that economic motivator, return on investment. You're really high in that theoretical motivator, data, facts, insights. And so I'm curious to know, I guess, one, if that resonates with you, and then two, how you manifest those motivators, whether it's in the workplace or just in your personal life.
So when I look down, so for folks who can't see because we can't share a screen, but what I'm looking at is a graph, and it has values and then a score/ranking and then percentile score. And mine goes from aesthetic to economic to individualistic, power, altruistic, regulatory, and theoretical. And aesthetic is kind of just below the 50th percentile for me. I'm not too aesthetic, which is why I have an amazing graphic designer. I'm very focused on economic, which makes sense. I'm a CEO, right? I'm running this company, and if I run it into the ground, I'm the one that goes broke. So it makes perfect sense that I would be focused on economic, and generating business and spending money wisely and so on. I've always been fairly individualistic, and I noticed that this assessment was co-authored or co-founded by Gordon Allport. And I actually studied some of his stuff in grad school. So this actually goes to Hofstede's dimensions of culture. So I thought this was really interesting. So on all those dimensions, I show up as really high individualistic, but there's room for me to care about others. So my altruistic is also fairly high. And so that's why I'm in the helping professions. That's why I love to teach. That's why I have a specific heart to help people who are new at something, new managers, new scuba divers, people who are new to learning and development. That's where I want to be. So I did resonate with it a lot, and especially regulatory being my lowest dimension, which is down at about the 30th percentile. I was like, I don't really like rules. There were parts of corporate life, especially with a couple of the corporations I worked at in Silicon Valley, where there was a lot of rules and everything had to be done just so. That grated against me pretty badly because I wanted to be creative and do my own thing, and that was not a place to do that. So overall, I thought it was interesting. It was intriguing.
Good. And, just for folks listening, you might say to yourself, okay, this sounds great. What do I do with this? How do I apply this? And I would just say, in principle, if you're listening to this, there are a couple things to keep in mind. One is, just by nature, we tend to try to motivate people in ways with which we're personally motivated. So when you have that twinkle in your eye, Eric, it's because you're talking about something through the lens of economic or theoretical, right? And if you and I are having a conversation and you're trying to motivate me, and I have the same motivators as you, have you ever had those conversations where you're like, oh, Will gets it, right? We're on the same page. And for folks listening, you probably have these conversations with your team where you're like, Will gets it. All right, we're on the same page. And then you've probably had conversations where it might even be the same message, same thing you're saying, same words. And you're like, you know what? This is falling flat. I don't feel like this is not connecting. And so what that might be indicative of is you might be speaking to somebody's demotivator, right? Because what's motivating for you might not be motivating for me, okay? And so we've all had that moment where we can feel like this isn't resonating with the person opposite me. And that's why as leaders, especially as new leaders, it's so important to say, I'm probably leading a team of folks who are driven by really different things, different motivators and demotivators. And that's why one size fits all approaches like team meetings or town halls or things like that don't work when they're done in a standalone fashion. Because if you have a team meeting and you're presenting one message, it might resonate with part of your team and it might not resonate with the other part of your team. So really, one size fits one. One size does not fit all. And that's why if you have these team meetings or these big change management messages or things like that, it's really important to have individualized follow-ups with each team member to make sure you're speaking the same language, the same motivator as them, to make sure that everybody's on the same page and is moving in the same direction together. So that would be kind of my action item for folks listening, is to really consider what might drive each team member, what might demotivate them, and then to think about your messaging. How can you include components of all of those motivators in your message to try to cast the widest net possible?
Excellent. Right on. Well, that was really, really interesting. So, Will, thank you so much. That was a really interesting conversation. But alas, it is time to go. Last question for you, though. How can people find you if they want to learn more?
Sure. Follow me on LinkedIn. It's Will Goldstein-Mahon, Mahon. And I will respond. If you send me an email or a DM, I'm happy to respond to any messages. If you want to learn more about motivators or anything else, happy to connect.
Well, everybody, thanks for listening. Please subscribe to the show and connect with me on LinkedIn. And be sure to pick up my well-researched book, Lead Like a Pro, The Essential Guide for New Managers. It's available on Amazon, and the first 2 chapters are free on my website. If you'd like to chat about how I can help you or your new managers, please drop me a line via my website, which is gerardtrainingsolutions.com. We will catch you on the next one. Have a good one, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.